The following featured presentation is part of the Skywalking Network.
Hi, welcome to Star Warsologies, the podcast about science and other academic fields of study seen in Star Wars. This time we have a really cool convention episode for you. It is our San Diego Comic-Con panel called The Mandalorian Under the Helmet. It was a panel we did at Comic-Con in 2022. I'm not on the panel. I'm your co-host, James Floyd, writer for StarWars.com, Star Wars Insider print magazine, but it was moderated by my co-host, Melissa Miller.
Thanks, James. I'm Melissa Miller. I'm the co-host of Star Warsologies and also the science and technology writer at Nerdist. We had a great time at Comic-Con. I'm excited for you all to hear the panel, so let's get right to it.
My name is Melissa Miller, and I'm the science and technology writer at Nerdist. And I also co-host a podcast called Star Warsologies with James Floyd, where we talk about everything that has to do with Star Wars, basically anyone's expertise and how it overlaps. So we've had an economist, we had a brewer, we've talked to Drea already on our panel about psychology. There's just way too many subjects, so we're going through them one by one. And so we're running this panel, and I was just curious watching The Mandalorian, or watching anything personally, what is real when I see it on screen? You know, how is this similar to our society, and how is it different? So that's why I assembled this panel today, and I'll let them introduce themselves and talk a little bit about yourself and your background, and also, while you're at it, who your favorite Star Wars character is. So we'll start here with you, Matt.
Hello, my name is Matt. I'm a fugitive recovery agent or a bounty hunter. I have a background of law enforcement for 12 years, and I've been in the bail industry for 6 years.
Favorite Star Wars character?
Yeah, I kind of like them all.
Okay.
Hi, it's good to see everybody in person. My name is Dr. Drea Letamendi. I am a licensed clinical psychologist at UCLA. I serve on their behavioral threat and risk assessment team as well with law enforcement. I am a behavioral science consultant for creators and folks who develop stories. And I also am the co-host of another podcast called the Arkham Sessions, which is a show all about psychology and pop culture narratives. Oh, my favorite, all of the droids, K2SO, R2D2. I'm like a droid person, love droids.
Really?
Hello, everyone. I'm Waltteri Vakki. Outside of my hobbies as a blacksmith, I'm a material scientist, and specifically in blacksmithing, to kind of provide an insight into what I do is I do swords, and I'm starting to look at arms and armor and other aspects of the art. I practice actually outside of Escondido, California. Here locally, we have a teaching facility that offers classes. As for my favorite Star Wars character, I have to say it's Count Dooku.
Oh, yes.
Hello, everyone. I'm Paul Wynns. I used to land big jets on small boats as a Navy pilot, but then me and everyone like me and my entire community of aircraft lost our jobs to drones. So I went to go work in industry. I was a project manager and aerospace engineer at the world's largest aerospace company. These days, I'm an entrepreneur. I co-founded a flight school for veterans and minorities who are aspiring to airline pilot careers, and we will soon fly a fleet of the world's first all-electric, zero-emissions training aircraft. My favorite Star Wars character is Obi-Wan Kenobi, because he's such a great student of people.
Nice. I'm actor Chris Bartlett, and I play all of the protocol droids in the new Star Wars shows. Oh, thank you. So I didn't know Andrea's favorite characters were droids. That's very special. My favorite Star Wars character is, without question, the power droid. The Gonk droid. He is his whole role is to bring, good energy to everybody. That's his whole, he's a battery with feet. I love his design, and he's so simple, and I mean, there's lots of them. I'm sure there's, lots of programming. Anyway, that's my favorite.
Yeah, I should have mentioned my favorite is R2-D2 because he just gets to be sassy and gets away with it, and that seems like
he does.
Dream come true. All right, great. Well, thanks. So hopefully it's obvious how they all fit into the Mandalorian, but we'll get through it now. Starting with maybe the most important question, that's for Paul. How disruptive would a toddler be in the cockpit?
Well, I'm going to go with not all that disruptive because, you can basically, you're at the controls of, this space vehicle, this air vehicle, whatever you want to call it, and all you have to do is pull the control stick back a little bit and, because F equals ma, the craft is going to accelerate around a corner that causes the apparent weight of everybody in the cockpit to go up by many, many multiples. You're pulling 2 Gs, 3 Gs. You're going to weigh 2-3 times your body weight. So the Mandalorian, he's strapped in and very comfy in his seat, but, Baby Yoda, you can unload the aircraft and Baby Yoda will float around and maneuver the aircraft and then pull back and then pin the toddler into the bassinet. But that said, I think, in this cockpit where there's high-powered electronics and radars and sensors and power couplings, probably the most dangerous part of the toddler is the drool that would short out the electronics.
Interesting.
Baby drool.
All right, Waltteri, let's get into that famous Mandalorian armor. So what are some historical examples of armor that's passed down through generations? We see the signet. How does that apply?
So, as it's fairly obvious, The Mandalorian places a great emphasis as a show, but also in the lore on the whole armor that they wear. And we kind of see this development within the Mandalorian show, where we go from a very basic suit to a more, a more robust, refined, and a decorated suit. And that's with the signet. When he receives the signet, that's often, I don't know if that would have been per se historically, specifically, I don't have any cases of that, where you would receive a signet for a specific task. But of course, your armor throughout history would have been embellished with various motifs, depending on, oftentimes, and this is mostly with very fancy suits of armor, put it that way. Armor is expensive, it's hard to make, so only the richest and the most affluent historically would have been able to afford these fancy suits of armor. But they would have been embellished oftentimes with religious motifs or, faction-related motifs. That was a big one, of course. If you can't identify, what faction you belong to with your suit of armor, that can cause issues, for example, on the battlefield. In regards to kind of the passing down of armor also, that goes back to the fact that the armor would have been, as I said, expensive to make. And that's why they were also so customized, because they did have, the people that made them often did have the money to get that sort of work done to it. But because the suits would have been made so well, especially these nice ones, they would have been passed down more than likely through generations and either resized for the new wearer or just kept as heirloom pieces. And that's oftentimes what we see in museums is, we have these magnificent works of art that have been very carefully curated and taken care of throughout the years.
Cool. And I did need to mention, we will have audience Q&A at the end and then also be available in the hallway for follow-up questions. So think of those. But talking about the armor, Drea, for someone like Mando, what kind of significance does that carry? And as Waltteri mentioned, we see, the rough and tumble stuff he's got at the beginning, and then there's the stuff that's, bespoke, made for him. What importance would that have for him?
Well, in a lot of armored or suited cultures, at first blush, you might think that there's a homogeneity to it. There's the sense of this standard that everybody's wearing the same thing and is expected to kind of behave the same way. And there is some psychology to that. It's called de-individuation, when you're covering up your body, especially your face. So a lot of us actually are covering our face right now, or wearing a helmet. There is an added sense of anonymity. And the idea of de-individuation is that you kind of lose a sense of your personal identity the longer you have that so-called mask on your body, on your face. And some studies do show that the longer somebody may be in this de-individuated state, the more they may break rules, the more they may act in ways that kind of are outside of maybe their normal behavior. And interestingly, I did a study on cosplay actually and asked some questions about folks who do cover their face, folks who do prefer to be in cosplay at conventions like this. And I see some cosplay. Can I see some hands up who are wearing helmets or in some cosplay? Great. And what we found actually is the opposite of de-individuation. We found that people who cosplay feel more like themselves, feel more personally identified in that costume or in that suit. And so I think Mando is a good example of this, where the suit, and especially as it becomes more identified to him as he kind of advances in his experience in the Watch and in the Guild, of course, he is seeing the suit as a part of his identity. And when we watch him with the armorer while she's making certain aspects of his suit, he ends up, that's when he's having his flashbacks about his childhood, his upbringing, what brought him to this community. And then you can sense that this connection to the armor is psychologically deep with him. Each piece of that armor isn't a way to necessarily cover him up. It's actually a way for him to connect to who he is and to have him sort of align with the values that he believes in.
So Matt, tell us a little bit about how that ties into your job. Is anonymity, helpful for you? There's definitely something to be said for, we don't ever see his face, but also the Mandalorian is very recognizable walking into those bars. So how does that ring for you as a bounty hunter in real life?
Yeah, so when you're out looking for bad guys, you want to blend in the best you can. You don't want them to see you coming. I think we can all, show of hands, who's ever watched Dog the Bounty Hunter on TV. Dwayne's a good friend of mine. I've known him for a long time, but you can't go anywhere with him, because as soon as you take 3 feet out into public, the whole world runs up and wants a picture and an autograph. So he's actually in the process of filming a new show, but he can't go out and work like he could before because everybody recognizes him. So in my line of work, I try to fit in, dress accordingly for who I'm going after. I kind of keep a barrage of props, if you will, in my car, a hard hat, reflective vest, things like that, just in case I need to blend in. So when it comes to the show, it's great that, you can't see his face, but obviously his helmet is recognizable. So in my line of work, that would be very, very bad. If I were to wear something similar, people would pick me out relatively easily. So it would make me apprehending a fugitive a lot more harder.
That makes sense. Well, Chris, it's obviously a different line of work, but you talked a little bit about being the protocol droids. We never see your face on screen for as much as you're in these shows. Tell us a little bit about how it's like, what it's like for you acting without being able to show those facial expressions and whether or not you're saying the lines under there.
Yeah, I am saying all the lines in English. What's cool about playing, wearing a mask is that you get to look at the face of your character, and already I'm coming up with backstory and attitudes and thinking and how this character might be. One Jack there who just appeared in Kenobi. This is a character who looks familiar to Forlom in The Empire Strikes Back. And so when they told me I'd be playing this character, I was so excited because I really wanted to see a LOM-class droid. Sorry, that was a very deep nerd comment. A LOM-class droid in action, because we only saw Forlom just standing there, right? But on the comics and the stories and everything, he has so much action. So with Q90, which is the second one from the left, when I first saw his costume, I did my screen test. I thought of him as a praying mantis, and so I went home after my initial screen test and studied praying mantis videos, which are actually pretty horrible. But they have a really creepy movement, where their head will sit still while their body's moving, and so that's how I played played Zero. And other characters, like C-3PO. I've played C-3PO on television for 16 years. And he has a very neutral face, a very neutral expression. So any emotion like fear or irritability or happiness all has to be, kind of sent out through your body so that the audience can read what's happening. And that's a lot of times why you see a character like C-3PO physically abusing R2, because you don't see the emotion in his face. You just see, this through his actions. But I do learn all the lines. One story was there's only droids up there, but I do play other aliens on the show, and one of them was the ferryman who episode 1, one of the very first scenes out on the ice. I had all these lines in English. It was when Mando didn't want to take the speeder that he was offering him because it was piloted by droids. Like that's a bad thing. And anyway, so I did all the lines in English. I came up with my own voice for this, and then when I was doing the rehearsal with Jon Favreau, I just had like this voice I came up with was, when Mando says, no, I don't want that one, I said,
oh, but I assure you the speeder is brand new. It just arrived on the Spinwood freighter.
And John goes, oh, that's good. Let's cartoon it down a little. And it's really what you want a director to say. You want him to tone you down and not have to build you from scratch, Anyway, I do all the lines. Sometimes they use my voice, sometimes they don't. It's totally fine because I'm having the time of my life. Yeah.
That's great, thanks. Well, let's switch gears here a little bit. Let's go back to Drea. Let's talk a little bit about Mando's childhood and just sort of get into, what that upbringing of him being orphaned and taken in as a foundling, how is that going to affect his decision-making as an adult? And what we see, just right away in the first couple of episodes of going from someone who's living this loner lifestyle to someone who finds, Grogu and someone to care about.
Yeah, I mean, something like that, having this hugely traumatic thing happen to you at a young age can have a lifelong impact. And what happens to Din Djarin is a number of things, right? Parental separation, the trauma of war. This is during a huge purge, right? And then the relocation, moving into a completely different place and having a whole new family. Now, luckily, this family, this community was very willing to take him in. He becomes a child of the Watch, and he begins to embody all the cultural beliefs, attitudes, and values of this community. And there are some great things about it, and then there are some really limiting things about this when it comes to how he's going to grow up and develop. So we start to see his anger and resentment toward droids, for instance. He believes that they're dangerous, that they could snap, that they could harm him and other people. So he has these fixed beliefs and attitudes that aren't exactly, true. His worldview is greatly determined by these early life experiences. The good thing about, I especially like the first season, because the good thing about what we see with Mando psychologically is that his worldview changes. And this is so uplifting for us, especially when we feel like we're around other people or we ourselves are kind of in a fixed worldview. First, he starts to develop a relationship with a droid in particular, IG-11. The other change, say?
So I just said RIP.
I know. And we start to see that he changes his perspective about droids. He believed that they had no feelings, that they had no soul, they were just programmed to do dangerous things. And interestingly, it's IG-11 that has emotional intelligence and points out, I think the line is you're sad. I know you're sad, and Din Djarin denies that. So interestingly, it's Mando who doesn't have as much emotional intelligence as some of the droids around him in the beginning. The other turning point is Grogu, of course. This is one of the biggest shifts in Mando's worldview, because he realizes, despite knowing he's good at being a bounty hunter, knowing that he can get his job done, and that he does this through breaking some rules, some violence, and a very, again, a fixed worldview, Grogu and the relationship that they have together impacts that and allows him to see that some rules you have to break in order to protect others, in order to have compassion, in order to even be cared for by somebody else. And this happens outside of his community because he's never seen a baby Yoda, a Grogu before. And that allows him to realize that, okay, I've actually got to become the thing that I hunt. I'm now a fugitive. I'm now on the other side of this, but I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do.
Well, and somewhere in there, Paul, all of this education has to happen. So between him being a child and finding Grogu, he has to learn how to fly, apparently every aircraft, fix every aircraft in record amount of time, from what I can tell. What are your thoughts on his skills in those regards, considering how many times he manages to do this over the course of, only 16 or 17 episodes so far?
Yeah, well, I mean, he is the hero after all, right? But, in real life, in our galaxy, it takes many, many thousands of hours and many years of building up skill just to do any of the most basic combat maneuvers that you see the Razor Crest doing with Mando at the controls. And then likewise, it takes many hundreds of hours and many years of experience just to be able to change out an engine on the most basic of any kind of fighter or jet aircraft. But this is all in the tradition, like the storytelling tradition of the hero who is a loner, who has all the skills that they need. And a lot of this, and I think why this texture, we love it when it comes up in sci-fi and in Star Wars stories especially. We love this idea of the lone hero. It harkens back to the Old West. It harkens back to the individualism of American society and our mode of storytelling. But I would challenge that by saying, if certainly aviation was born in America, right? It was born specifically in the Midwest. Orville and Wilbur Wright were, two hipsters in a bicycle store that decided to push a glider over a cliff, and they got lucky and it flew. And so everything about aviation and what we see in that heroic pilot kind of comes from that American Midwestern sensibility of the rugged individual hero who's turning wrenches on their aircraft in their barn with their grandpa. And that's, how they went from there to going to the moon. But if you were to talk to the Israeli Air Force, they have their own tradition of aviation, and they have fought more air combat than the U.S. has in their history and ever will. If you talk to the Indian Air Force and their fighter pilots, who recently defeated a formation of American stealth fighters in a recent air combat exercise, they would have their own cultural definitions of what a heroic pilot would look like. And it goes on, right? So here in the U.S., 50% of all pilots overall are going to retire in the next 10 years. It's a very boomer-heavy population. 95% of those pilots are white males. So it is very much, we have these storytelling tropes and we love them, but I would challenge it by saying, hey, you could, really what I see when I see an aircraft take off, I see a whole team of people who do that, but it makes sense for the heroic person, for storytelling, so yeah.
Fair enough. Well, so Matt, maybe not with flying every single aircraft perhaps, but, fixing things and adaptability. How important is that to someone who's getting into your profession? And what kind of training do you undertake to make sure that you are ready for those sorts of situations?
Well, hunting down bad guys is a very fluid line of work. You wake up, you have a plan, okay, I'm going to this street or this address on this street, I'm going to knock on this house and I'm looking for this person, right? And in our minds, we think they're going to open the door, come out, no trouble. When we put them in handcuffs, take them to jail, and we're done. That's not how it works. So to work in the line of work that I do, you have to be able to adapt to pretty much anything. You name it, you think of it, I've probably experienced or I will experience it soon. As far as training goes, it's just like law enforcement and military. You can't have too much. You can never learn it all. You constantly have to learn how to be better, train with firearms, training and talking to people. I have found when I worked in law enforcement, I was a master report writing instructor and a master interrogator. I went to several schools, and I have found that 9 out of 10 times you can typically talk people into compliance if you just know how to talk to them like a human. Maybe sometimes even come down to their level. So when it comes to training, I mean, there's a whole bunch of things out there that you can do or I could do, but I find that learning to be compassionate, learning to talk to people like you understand where they're coming from, even if you have to, I hate to say it, kind of lie to them. You gotta, it's like a child. You gotta kind of pat them on the butt a little bit and talk them into compliance to get them to do what you want to do, so it doesn't turn into some big mess.
No, that's a good skill. And we don't see that, I feel like, a lot with Mandalorian. So he's just got his main lines or anything like that. Drea, did you have something to add?
There's a lot to add here. What I'm thinking about is probably the amount of moral distress that Matt has to navigate, or at least in the beginning, early career work in this, having to make some decisions maybe that allowed you to get your job done. When we think about what happened to Mando, when I say moral distress, I mean like you might be doing something that doesn't necessarily align well with your values, but you may know that the outcome could be a good one. So there's a little bit of chaotic good that's required in this work, right? And that's what I'm thinking about, that not everybody can get into this line of work. In fact, a lot of professions, all the professions that we have, there's a certain type of personality profile that will allow us to be successful in the things that we do, right? So with real life bounty hunting, you mentioned, Matt, the fluidity of this, a little bit of moral flexibility, the willingness to take some risks, the chaotic good personality trait, a healthy amount of narcissism, honestly, which I think is probably good for most of our professions, but maybe dial that up a bit in order to get the responses that you need. So it's incredibly fascinating that's the real part about this.
Yeah. Let's shift gears a little bit to the Hollywood aspect of this. Waltteri, I'm curious because it's very similar in a lot of armor spaces and blacksmithing shops throughout pop culture. I'm used to the anvil, and you heat things up, and you stick it in cold water for some reason. There's steam and, grime and stuff like that. When you see these sorts of depictions, is that what a blacksmith shop looks? Is that what your shop looks like? How are things different?
Yeah, so I'll break it into two different parts, kind of what does a shop look like to me, and then how does Hollywood differ from that? We'll take liberties with it. I'd say if we look at the shop that you see in The Mandalorian, there's a few things that stand out. One could say the forge, but we'll call it the forge, is in the middle of the room. Some people might not like it in the middle of the room, but with how it's set up and with how you see assuming the chimney and the workspace around it, you can get a lot of large pieces in over that thing. You can go in from numerous sides. You have access to it on all sides. So a lot of what shop design goes to, in my opinion, is, and from a professional viewpoint with blacksmiths back in the day and modern ones these days, it's a efficiency thing, because if it's not efficiently set up to whatever your working style is, you're going to be floundering. There's going to be stuff in the way. So in that sense, probably that's the real first thing is efficiency. But in regards to how we differ from how it's portrayed in The Mandalorian from reality, oftentimes one thing that stood out to me specifically is there is what appears to be an apparent lack of tools, right? They open the tool cabinet and there's one pair of tongs, and he has like one file and there's like a hammer. The hammer rack that I have has probably probably 30, 40 different handled tools, of which only a handful are hammers. There is probably another 25 hammers on top of that, on top of the other tooling. So, there would be an immense amount of equipment, tooling, spread out around the shop, and what I view it as, pretty much any space that you can put tooling into that won't get in your way, but that you can use, it would be filled. In regards to the shop overall, in the Mandalorian, they're burning, some gas. We assume it kind of looks like a propane flame. But historically, oftentimes, we would have been burning charcoal, or in the last few hundred years, it would have been coal from the earth. So there would be kind of a sooty, gritty, grimy sort of fine layer that settles on top of stuff you can't get access to, like on top of if you have chimney vent pipes or anything like that, they'll get covered in this sort of stuff. I work with coal, so everything in the shop I work at is covered in this fine, greasy, gritty sort of mess. It's like if you combine used motor oil, grease, and this stuff off the floor, this grit. So that's kind of everywhere. But they're not messy also, and that's what you can see in the Mandalorian. They're not like there's stuff in the way, and this goes back into the efficiency thing, because it is, at the end of the day, for a lot of people that do it professionally, it is a profession. One more thing in regards to kind of the specific tooling we see, the forge, with the flames, and this ties into how does Hollywood do it a little different. You see, these numerous jets of flames, and it's like, well, why not just have one jet of flame that you can make smaller or bigger? It's kind of like this big, it looks really nice, fancy. But in that sense, it's a little questionable, and just overall, the Mandalorian specifically takes generous liberties with their continuity of some of the processes you see, like with the beskar. You're seeing it's like this pattern alloy billet metal ore thing that Lord describes it numerous ways, and it's melted down, but it doesn't glow. But then you can take it and work it hot, and it glows, right? But when it was molten, it wasn't glowing. So it's kind of like, how do you get something to be molten and not glow? If you think about it, it raises some questions. So there were some liberties taken, but overall, I think the show accomplished the sort of vibe. We kind of got the idea of what was going on. Lastly, I did like whatever big tool that the ingot was placed into, and it came down and struck it. It was an interesting design. It kind of looks like some sort of drop hammer or something, which would be usually for flow extruding, like aircraft frames.
Yep.
Oftentimes, our aircraft parts would be drop forged because you can actually flow the material into the die cavities. But overall, I think they capture it fairly well. They miss some nuances here and there.
Yeah, Chris, hopefully you're not offended by all our talk of like, well, they just do it because it looks cool. And
You're saying Hollywood overdoes something?
I know,
That's,
right?
I mean, that's so outrageous.
I feel like we're picking on you a little bit, though, picking on droids and this. But, so speaking to Hollywood makes it look cool. What's it like to be on set? How's it? We've all seen the behind-the-scenes things about the volume, and we want to hear more about that.
Please.
Yeah. We shoot both on the volume. Well, we shoot on the volume, on a regular set with no volume, and on location. What the volume is, maybe I suppose you all know, maybe you don't. It is basically walls and a ceiling of digital displays, and we can put anything we want on there, and we can adjust all of those things on a computer and move it around on the screen. And it's indistinguishable from reality when you're standing in it. It's so cool. It's like the most interesting, most captivating Disney attraction you could go to. So there's a shot of me on location and then one on the volume, and they look like they both have this vast, we're both in this vast environment. The great thing about it is the color in the volume from the lights and everything bounces off the characters, and it makes all the characters feel like they're really in the scene on a location. Whereas on a green screen, you don't get any of that, reflection and color. It's so easy to pretend when you're on the volume, because you might be in this like neon encrusted city covered in grime, or you might be out on the desert sand dunes of Tatooine, or some ice lake, you know. And anyway, when I was on as the ferryman right there, the pier and a little bit of snow around it was practical. So I step up onto the pier, Mando's there, and then all around you in 360 degrees is you can see all the way to the horizon. You know, of course, Mando walks to the end of the pier and he stops, because if he keeps going, he would walk through the LED wall. But when I was playing Q90 in the Razor Crest, I was piloting the Razor Crest. I hope I did it. Okay, job. Anyway, doesn't matter. When I got in, John said, "Chris, why don't you go get familiar with the cockpit?" And I was like, "Oh yes." So I jump in and I'm hitting all the buttons and I'm flicking all the levers and all the buttons work, and it's a practical cockpit. It's real. And then they said, "Oh, Chris, you're a droid, so you're just gonna jack into the scomp link, and that's how you fly the ship." And I'm like, I'm in Star Wars. I'm not complaining. But I still was doing all the buttons, and so you'll see in the episode, Zero is still pushing stuff, even though I'm locked into the ship here. But I'm in a real cockpit. I have real controls. Outside is the expanse of space, and I'm seeing stars, and they're moving slightly like this, and then when I say jumping to hyperspace now, all of the stars stretch to infinity, just like we all see in Star Wars, and it's so real. And I mean, I'm like, I would do this for free. It's so fun. So being on the volume is great, and plus the sets that they build that are what they do is there's practical props and stuff, then there's the volume, and it kind of like just melts into the volume. If you walk up really close, this is a secret, don't tell anybody. If you walk up really close and look at the screen, which I have done, it looks like a video game. And but because the camera is just back here, it kind of gets a little blurry, and so it looks so real on the screen. So anyway, it's so fun to do it. And there's so many talented people that are working on it to either build sets or bring in props or build 3D worlds that show up on the volume. So yeah, it's a ton of fun.
And that to pilot, that's where that texture of realism comes from, because in an actual cockpit in an aircraft, whether the aircraft's maneuvering or not, the lighting is constantly changing. Because anytime you change heading, even any kind of minuscule change in roll, pitch, or yaw, the lighting and the shadows especially are going to move all over the flight deck. They're going to move all over the cockpit. And that's what I love about all the scenes in the volume, is the lighting is constantly changing. Even for a vehicle that's not really wildly maneuvering, things are always, like the star field is very subtly changing. So that was nice.
Ah, cool.
Yeah.
Well, I can't take credit for that.
Wow. You wore it well.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, and we have a few more minutes before audience Q&A. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about building also the droids?
Oh, building, yeah. So all of these that you see on the screen, I built, except for Q90. He was built by Legacy Effects. And that just came because I loved building costumes. I see a Jedi back there, and I see the Scarlet Witch back there. I loved building costumes, and so one day I built a C-3PO, and it took like 3 years. I say one day, it took 3 years. Anyway, so that was and then in 2006, Lucasfilm contacted me because they said they wanted to use the costume. And I was like, don't you have 15? Why would you need mine? And it just turned out that they only had 4, and they were all in exhibits, and they needed someone to play him on television outside of the films. And so that turned into, now it's been 16 years that I've been playing him, but that led to my being cast as the droids on the shows. And then, just in our conversations and working together, they learned that I was also building some of this stuff. So they're like, could you make, another one? I said, yeah. And so then that turned into like 12 of them. And, anyway, that's literally me in my shop, building the ones that we see on the show over the years, the shows. And what's it like? I mean, it's a lot of dust and a lot of grinding and working with tools. And, the dream when you're building costumes, right, cosplayers, is wouldn't it be cool if the studio that, invented this character, what if they saw it and thought, you did a good job. We would like to use that, That was always the dream, but I never really imagined that it would happen because I'm just some guy in my, shop at 2 a.m. Making costumes. But ultimately, that is what happened. And so I still am building them and still assembling them. And sometimes they say, hey, we need this in 4 days. And I'm like, that's not enough time. But you still do it because you love the work. And it's so fun to be able to work with Jon Favreau and to be able to come up with designs for droids and work with Doug Chang to come up with some designs and also to make choices like, colors of droids and colors of eyes and stuff. Like, that's awesome. I love it. So it's really a dream. And the main thing that I take away from this is do the thing that you love to do, even if there is no plan to make this a career. Because if you love doing it, just keep going, and the opportunities will come when you're prepared because you've been working on it. And I'm sure everybody on this stage can say something similar.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, that does really apply to a lot of different things. Well, let's open it up to audience Q&A. Do we have anyone with questions? I saw your hand up. Okay, so the question is for Matt. What is the closest experience to a Star Wars bounty hunter story you might have? Fallen in any Sarlacc pits or anything like that? No. Crawled out of any Sarlacc pits?
No, I can't think of any. I can't think of any off the top of my head. I can't say that I have broken into or gained access under false pretenses onto Disney Studio grounds to make an arrest. I have done that.
What about the seedy bars? We see the bounty hunter bars, or there's always these cantinas where Mando walks into. Is that a kind of place you find yourself?
Oh yeah, I mean I'm looking for the worst of the worst. I'm not looking for average people, normal people like us that pay our taxes and go to work. The 4 or 5 times I have found myself looking for those people, you just knock on your door and say, hey, go back to court. I don't even take them to jail. But yeah, I mean, I find myself in the place where crime and bad people love to congregate. Yeah, I find myself spending a lot of times. I'm probably more, in my hometown, I'm probably more well-versed in the bad, seedy bars than I am my own local bars right by my house.
Yes, in the back there.
So the question is, do we, as creative artists, are we bound by canon? Great question. Right. Well, in the last 15, 20 years, I think has now been called legend. But what John and Dave do is they take familiar looking characters and environments and spin them into something new. So an example like the ferryman, he looks like, put on my nerd hat right now, the Kubaz character in the Streets of Mos Eisley, who was with the snout and the goggles. When I first saw him, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm playing that guy. And they said, no, it's the same species, and there's a lot of them in the galaxy. And so, everything has to have a familiar feel to be in Star Wars, and sometimes we can tweak them a little bit. One quick example was the bartender in season 1 was an RA-7 droid, or Death Star droid for us older fans. And originally that was supposed to be a I was told a black C-3PO and a black protocol droid. And I was thinking, to your question, I was thinking, there's a black protocol droid in the comics called 000, and I would hate for him to just be the bartender, or one that, could be confused for him. So I was like, yeah, I could make that for you, but I also just finished this Death Star droid, and if you'd like to use that one. And they said, yeah, we'd like that one. Just don't show John, because he's really distracted by chrome shiny robots. So, anyway, ultimately, that's what ended up in the scene. And partly it was because I, as a fan, was like, I want the first time we see a black protocol droid to be like, I would love for it to be him. And so I'll save that. So I'm not saying anything, by the way, and I about that character. Just I like him. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes? Okay. So maybe a question for Drea then, in terms of the Mando really changes his personality type and stuff like that when he comes into contact with Grogu. Is there any chance that Grogu is using his Jedi mind powers to make everybody love him and stop hunting him?
How can you not fall for this cute little Grogu?
He's a monster.
I think, yeah. I mean, I think if there's, well, let me start with this dyad is really important, right? Because this could have been another species or alien, it could have been another kind of child. There was something specific to Grogu. And I think there were some experiences that Mando had in their bonding that led to a shift in his worldview. And that cognitive dissonance, right? I believed a certain thing, I'm a part of this guild, it's just kind of like, just get this job done. He had done other things before that didn't impact him psychologically like this. So I would say it's a good theory that maybe there's something in Grogu's use of the Force that facilitated the bonding. But I think it's also what they experienced together. Grogu saved his life, saved Mando's life, the Mudhorn, right? So there's that sense of like, we've now shared something really life-threatening, and we rely on each other for survival. And as the armorer said, survival is what our community is. So Grogu did have some of those features that Mando attaches to.
Any other questions? Yeah, any Baby Yoda situations where you've helped them escape instead of turning them in?
I've never helped anybody escape, but yes, I have built a bond with a handful of defendants that I've arrested. I mean, we're all human. We all make mistakes. We've all had our temporary lapses in judgment. Somebody gets arrested, we bail them out, they miss court, and I come looking for them, and then you arrest them, and they're very upset, or they have a lot going on in their life. I mean, you guys can only imagine the excuses that I hear of why I didn't go to court. But I know some of them are legitimate. They're a single parent, and their child is sick, and their parents are on their deathbed, or need round-the-clock care, and their car broke down. And so I get it. One of the neat things about my job is when you miss court and the judge issues a warrant, you now become my problem. However, I don't have to take you to jail. I have an option of what's called reinstating the bond, where I can give you some paperwork and you can take it to the judge and he'll reinstate your bond and you can stay out and continue to fight your case. I typically reserve that for the people that communicate with me in some form or fashion, right? I get it. Our phones get lost or stolen, or a lot of people don't, I'm not exactly dealing with the richest people on the planet. Their phones get shut off. They'll buy drugs and other vices instead of pay their cell phone bill, their electricity bill, so they live in the dark and whatnot. So I do have that option, and I do exercise that regularly. But all I really look for is just compliance. If I can get you to answer the phone and I can start a dialogue and build a rapport, I'm more than likely to give you that paperwork. But, I get a lot of that. I'm sure a lot of people have never seen that movie, Catch Me If You Can type of thing. I deal with that a lot. You'll never catch me. Click. Okay, well, now you've made it personal.
I can
right? So then when I find you, you are absolutely going to jail. Yeah. And criminals are smart. They know, hey, it's a misdemeanor case. Can you find someone to give me a ticket? Nope. You're going to jail. You made it personal, right? If you were just an adult about it and said, hey, give me a couple weeks and I'll go back to court. Okay, fine, I'll give you a couple weeks. If you don't, then I'm going to come out and look for you. But So yes, building a rapport and having empathy is a big part of what I do.
It's good to hear. Well, this will be an episode of Star Warsologies up in the next week. If you want to share it with your friends, check out our other episodes. I'll put up the social media slide, though it's a little compacted there. Sorry about that. We'll be in the hallway to answer more questions if you have them. Otherwise, thank you so much to all of you for coming out, and thank you for being here. That wraps up this episode of Star Warsologies. I want to thank my panelists so much for being at Comic-Con. We had a great time. That's Matt Laird, Drea Letamendi, Paul Wynns, Chris Bartlett, and Waltteri Vakki. And we want to thank all of you for listening. If you have an idea for a topic for Star Warsologies, or you know an expert we should interview, let us know at Star Warsologies on Twitter and Instagram, or at Star Warsologies, that's Star Wars OLOGIES @gmail.com. Please also rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite service.
We are part of the Skywalking Network, where you can also find a variety of other great shows about Star Wars, Disney, and Marvel, including Collectopolis, The Neverland Clubhouse, and classic Marvel Star Wars comics, and the flagship show Skywalking Through Neverland. There's also the YouTube show Today in Star Wars History. You can find all of these shows at skywalkingnetwork.com. See you next time on Star Warsologies, when we go a little outside Star Wars to do our panel from Comic-Con, The Science of Jurassic World.
Comic-Con! Woo!